Hello everyone, and welcome back to another one of my Mythic Dungeons tutorials. Today we're going to be covering the basis of creating your first dungeon. There's going to be a lot to it, so I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can. I'll also try my best to make sure this video is in increments, so if there's a specific section you wish to view information on, I'll have it timestamped so that way you can just skip right ahead to it. I will do my best to make that part as accessible as I can. Now, the last thing we did was go over some config options, and we looked at a lot of the files just to kind of get an idea of what they were about and what all they could offer. So this time we're going to be covering the actual creation of the dungeons. Let's go ahead and get started. The first command you're going to need is your md create command. Now if you type md, you're going to see a big list of commands here. You can also import old dungeons with DXL. I'm not entirely certain how that works, as I personally have never touched DXL before. I was never big into dungeon development at the time, but the option is there. There's more info on the wiki should you so choose. Anyway, so you can see there's a lot of commands here. What we are going to do is we're going to type md create, and then you are going to want to type your dungeon name. Here I'm just going to type my first dungeon. Easy enough. If I can spell it correctly. There we go. Okay. Now when you're done, you'll see successfully created blank dungeon, and it should show the dungeon name. There's a plugin I may have forgotten to update, which is a placeholder compatibility plugin. So right now it says $1. Realistically, if everything's up to date, it'll show the dungeon name. But if it doesn't, don't sweat. You might just need to update a plugin like I do here. So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to just go ahead and go right into the dungeon. So md edit my first dungeon. Here we are. So one thing I like to do, if you like to build in even numbers, you can entirely disregard this part. I like to build in odd numbers because I think things just look better in odd numbers. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I've heard it's a neurodivergent thing, but whatever the case, what we're going to do is we are going to type md stuck, and that'll teleport us right back to the start of the world for now. And then we are going to type teleport, TP, teleport, whatever command plugin you have, 0, -60, 0. The Y value may change depending on what Minecraft version you're running, but if you are using the Caves and Cliffs update or later, -60 is going to be where you start at, as you can see here. 0, -60, 0. Okay. So before I look down or move, I'm just going to type md set. And the only two commands we're going to worry about right now are lobby and spawn. We're going to go ahead and set both because I think they are both equally necessary and work pretty much the same. I think a lobby, the only difference is if you're in a party, it'll put everybody there until the dungeon actually starts. If you are one-manning a dungeon, it'll just automatically start the dungeon. Okay, so the next thing I like to do, I like to use gold blocks. Gold is just my favorite color. Of course, I don't care much for Minecraft gold, but, you know, to each their own. And I'm just going to go ahead and mark the spawn block. Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and just talk about some basic world stuff that you can do. So what's really, really cool is you can utilize several external plugins while using this one. So basically everything that you can do in Multiverse will apply to your dungeons. So say you wanted it to be always daytime. You can do mv do daylight cycle, mv game rule do daylight cycle false. And now you can see it is perpetually right there in the sky. And then from here you can just type day, night, you know, time set, I don't know, day, I guess. But basically you have control over time, which is really, really cool. As you can see, multiverse makes it an instance as well, my first dungeon _0. All instances will utilize the multiverse commands that you type, which is really, really cool. That means it doesn't matter which instance you're in. My first dungeon 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 35, doesn't matter. It will always be this way. They will all use the same game rules. Very, very handy. I figured this out and it just made life really, really nice. So now that we have that one out of the way, let's talk about another real quick, World Edit. If any of you are World Edit builders, the good news is you can easily use World Edit in this. It will just, all it does is just, you know, utilize, all it does is utilize world space. So you can create to your heart's content inside your dungeons with World Edit, and it'll still work exactly as you would expect it to. Very, 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 very handy for dungeon building. I personally am a World Edit builder, so I am overly ecstatic about the idea of being able to use it inside of a dungeon and have all of my stuff be saved. Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and talk about your starting area. As I was saying with World Edit, I'm just going to go ahead and put us inside of a box for now. Okay, so we'll do it 2 out like that, 2 out that way. We'll do, I don't know, walls, stone, bricks, I guess, because that's pretty basic dungeon-esque, right? And we'll just stack it 5 times, 4 times, stack it 4 times. Okay, so say we're in our starting room. What I like to do for my doors is I usually like to have some kind of, you know, signal or something that pretty much tells you, hey, interact with this so that way we know you are ready to go. Some dungeons you just don't want them to start immediately, you know? And that makes perfect sense to me. So what I like to do is I'll usually use like a lantern or something that fits the theme, and I'll just throw it right in a corner or something with some kind of sign saying right click to start dungeon. So what I'm going to do now is utilize some iron bars. We'll make this really dungeon-like. Okay. So now, say we started off in our dungeon, we have no way out of here. You know, we're just in a box and that's that. How do we actually get started? Well, we are going to utilize what Mythic Dungeons refers to as functions. If you are somebody who likes to build and keeps your inventory clear, there's a command that you will utilize in order to get that function tool back. It's going to be MD function tool. Now, whenever you create a new dungeon, you will have this feather by default. You don't have to worry about always typing this, but if you do clear your inventory like I do a lot, having that command there is really, really amazing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's a little complicated, but still pretty cool. So we are going to do location functions, block editor, and then we're going to do a trigger. I just got to remember where it is. There it is, signal receiver. Okay. So bear with me. I can explain some of these in a future tutorial, but for now, feel free to just copy along doing what I'm doing. If you right click block type, it's going to be set to air. I'm just going to go ahead and type it in again, just so that way we can make sure. Okay. And now we're not going to worry about anything else here except for the sticky piston. If we right click on signal receiver, we'll get conditions, signal name, and allow retrigger. By default, allow retrigger is only set to trigger 1 time only. You can change it by right-clicking with the torch in your hand. But now we're going to go ahead and change the signal name, and it's going to listen for door. Okay, easy enough. So let's recap that for a second. Whenever this receives the door signal, it's going to change this block out with an air block. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to right click it with the function tool. We're going to copy it, by holding this book and right-clicking. And then we're going to paste it to the bar below, so that way they both disappear. Okay? Now to get out of our menu, you need to shift. It'll take you back to your main primary inventory where all you will have is your function builder tool and then whatever else you may have had in your hotbar. It's very, very handy. Just don't forget shift is always how you come back to this. It took me a few times to be able to remember. I would freak out like, wait, how do I get back to my function tool? I can't find it anywhere. Just hold shift. It'll take you right back without fail. Okay, so next we're going to right click the lantern. And we are going to do dungeon function, signal sender, player triggers, right click or click on the sign here for right click block. And all we're going to do is we're just going to change the signal name to match the signal that's receiving. And it'll tell you too in the hologram, signal door. Signal door. Okay? And that's all we're going to mess with. So one thing I'm going to stress to you a few times throughout the rest of this tutorial is there is a command that you really need to know. It's called the save command or /md save. This will save your dungeon. If you leave without saving, you will not retain any progress you've made. Highly recommend you make sure you are always saving. Just, for everything that's good in the world, make sure you save. Because the last thing anyone wants to do is have to, restart everything that they just did. So, MD save, and then MD leave. What's really cool is you get teleported right back to where you started from. I believe this can be changed in the config to force teleport you back to somewhere else. But if you don't change any of it, you will just always teleport back to where you enter the dungeon from. So we're going to type MD edit, or actually no, sorry. We're going to type MD play my first dungeon. Okay, so here we are, right in the center, right in our lobby. What do? Well, remember we made it to where when you right click that lantern there, this is going to disappear. So let's right click the lantern. Bam, door is gone. You can add some other cool stuff like sound effects and whatnot if you so choose to, but for the time being we're not going to bother with that. But now you wonder, okay, well we're out of the cell. Where do we go? What do we do from here? There's nowhere to go. It's all just open flat world. Is there anything I can do? Well, yes and no. For the time being, no. But that's what we're going to go back into the edit mode to work on. So to do so, we are going to type MD leave. Okay, now that we're out of the dungeon, we are going to go back in by typing MD edit my first dungeon. Okay, now let's talk about leaving the dungeon. Make sure to leave some holes open if you're working in closed rooms, so that way you can always fly out of them or leave them while you're editing. Trust me, nothing's more annoying than when you close off a room and then realize, wait, I actually needed to get back in there. So we're gonna grab a couple different blocks here. We're gonna do a ladder block and a diamond block. The reason for this is we're actually going to be utilizing a couple of different things here, and I will show you in a moment. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to right click your diamond block or whatever block you choose. This is going to be our finish block. So we're going to right click it, go to dungeon functions, and we're going to click on the enchanting table, which is finish dungeon. And as you can see in the description here, it formally finishes the dungeon, marking the dungeon as finished for the player. Also puts the dungeon on cooldown if there is an access cooldown. Okay, so now we're going to have player triggers. I personally like to use on right click block. You can do block detector, so when a block is placed or broken, whenever a player sends a message, which I don't know if that's going to be, I think you'll probably want to use conditions for that. Player death counter, again, might want to use conditions for that, or you can just make it to where if they die and it's finished. Wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it. key item, so you can only finish the dungeon if you have a certain item in your hand, or you can just make it to where if you walk within a certain radius, you finish. But I like using right click, so that way you have more control over whether or not you want to finish the dungeon or if you just want to go back through. So we're just going to click right click. The only thing I'm going to kind of mess with here, or the only two things I'm going to show you here, is the target type. You can choose between none, player, and party. Now those are all pretty much about as straightforward as they sound. None, as far as I know, doesn't really do anything. Maybe it does, I haven't played around with it much. Player will make it per player, so only the player that right-clicked will actually finish the dungeon. Party will make it to where it finishes the dungeon for everybody and everybody leaves. Now there's a second option here where you can turn it on and off whether or not you get teleported out of the dungeon. If the enchantment table is glowing like this, it means the player or party will leave the dungeon whenever they right click on the block. But if there's no enchantment on the enchanting table, it'll say player stays after triggering. That means they'll finish the dungeon, however they'll still have access to all the areas they were in until the dungeon is officially closed out. There are different ways to handle that. We will not go over that right now, but that is something important to keep in mind. I personally like keeping player leaves after triggering on because it means you don't have to wait forever if there's like another party trying to get into the dungeon and you have the instance limit set to like 1 or 2. That can be kind of annoying, so definitely keep that on. In my personal opinion, I suggest it, but that's up to you. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to come over here to the ladder side, and we're pretty much going to do a similar thing, but we're going to, instead of doing finish dungeon, we're going to do leave dungeon. On player right clicks. Now, leaving a dungeon will not give you the loot of completion. That is the big difference between formally finishing your dungeon and leaving it instead. When you leave a dungeon, all you're doing is just abandoning the dungeon and abandoning your progress. Now this could be helpful, say if you forgot an item that you needed, your armor was about to break, you don't have enough food, and you don't want to risk dying and maybe losing all your stuff if you have that set as an option, so you just want to leave the dungeon and then come back immediately after. Or maybe your party is just not very far along and you want to pick up new people, you can always just add a leave dungeon thing somewhere. So what we're going to do now that we have this, again, this does utilize the none player or party. It'll do exactly what finish does. We're going to go ahead and hold shift. I'm going to right click this. We're going to copy the function and go scroll over to the scroll here. And we're just going to paste it on each ladder icon. Just so that way you can click on literally any ladder and they'll all do the same thing. And here, as you can see, it said autosave complete. Still, always going to recommend MD save. Even if you see autosave, just make sure you save because any small details will get skipped after the autosave if you do not save. Okay, so let's go ahead and type MD leave. And now we're going to type MD play my first dungeon. Alright, now if you remember, right click the lantern to exit the first room. We are going to just leave the dungeon first. Okay, so as you can see, we're out of the dungeon. Nothing special happened, no messages, we're just back. Okay, so we have successfully abandoned the dungeon. But now, if we type MD play my first dungeon, and we repeat the process, but go over to the other side, if we right-click the finish block here, you will see you completed a dungeon. That'll be the formal finish, and that will be how you can actually acquire loot from your dungeon instead of abandoning it. Now, I'm not going to cover loot in this tutorial, however, I will cover it in one of my next tutorials, either the next one or the one after. But there's a lot that you can do, so but basically between leaving and finishing, that's the main difference. Leaving is just abandoning your dungeon. Finishing means you will get the loot that you set for the dungeon. Very important to keep in mind. because it'll also affect cooldowns if you decide to put a cooldown on your dungeon. And that's pretty much going to be the basis of doing your first dungeon. Very simple, very straightforward. In my next tutorial, I'm actually going to be covering just a couple more advanced mechanics while still covering dungeon creation. But I hope this video has helped you out a decent amount, at least when it comes to, you know, how to get started. Again, we'll be covering more advanced mechanics in the next tutorial because there's just so much you can do and so much more that you should know when setting up dungeons. Anyway, if this video inspired you, please make sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. That will help other people who are wanting to learn see this video on their YouTube homepage. It'll help kind of get my video floating around a little bit more to help out others who may be new to this plugin. You know, help me help them if you would be so kind. Otherwise, I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see what you come up with in the future.